What does this airplane have to do with this airplane? It's an amazing story, and we're going to bring it to you in a brand new series entitled Celebrating Aviation Art with Mike Mashat. We're going to be posting these midweek, and we hope you enjoy it. This airplane is a Flying Tigers Douglas DC-8 63 convertible freighter. This airplane is a Blahnik L-13, accompanied by a Piper Super Cub tow plane. The connection between these two is that the gentleman flying the Flying Tigers DC-8 at that time was named Richard S. Drury. Newly hired by the airline, he was furloughed in 1973 and wound up getting a job as a tow pilot at Lake Elsinore, the Skylark glider port, where I flew. That's where we met and formed a friendship. Ironically, Rick had soloed in gliders on that very spot at Skylark Field in 1959. 11 years later, he was in the Air Force flying the Douglas Sky Raider in Vietnam. Flying the Sky Raider was a dream come true for Rick. He was a consummate airman. The term born to fly really applies. Very, very gifted pilot, and probably one of, if not the best pilot I've ever flown with. But he always dreamt of flying a large radial engine powered fighter like the Sky Raider. And here we see two Sky Raiders and an R.G. Smith drawing as they appeared in Navy markings during the Korean War. In Vietnam, they were used by both the Navy and the Air Force, as you see here. In 1979, Rick wrote an award-winning novel entitled My Secret War. It captured all the excitement, the drama, the terror, everything he went through as a pilot in that year flying the Sky Raiders. And he was assigned to these airplanes at the U.S. Air Force 1st Special Operations Squadron, Nakhon Phanom, Thailand. It's a brute of an airplane, and it had the affectionate nickname of SPAD, named for the World War I fighter because of its relatively slow speed compared to the jets of that era. However, that slow speed was a real asset on search and rescue missions. And other components of the search and rescue mission, called Sandys, were the North American OV-10A Bronco and the Sikorsky HH-53B Super Jolly Green Giant. In chapter 9 of his book, he described a special mission where he was rescuing some pilots from the jungle. It was a riveting account. I remember sitting on the edge of my seat reading this and thinking to myself, this has to be a painting. And Rick agreed, and we embarked on a project in the early 1980s. The event occurred on February 7th, 1970. An A6 intruder from the USS Ranger had been shot down, and the two crewmen had successfully ejected, although one was injured. The crash was by the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, and the crewmen were next to the wreckage of the airplane. It was a daunting mission. We begin with building a model to create kind of a diorama of the scene that I'm going to depict in the painting. This is the monogram 148th Sky Raider kit. You notice I painted it silver, and the purpose here was to be able to see the lighting, light and shadow, the tonality on the silver airplane versus trying to replicate that at this point in camouflage. Painting Vietnam camo was quite a challenge, and so getting everything right begins with just a plain model. You'll notice on the left wing, I've done a little kit bashing on the auxiliary fuel tank to create what will become the rocket pod that was mounted for that mission. So here we have the comp drawing. It's a kind of a loose sketch, just kind of getting the very beginnings of the story. And what we're looking at is Rick orbiting overhead and looking down into the scene as the Jolly Green Giant makes the first pickup. You'll see the Sky Raiders laying in a smoke screen. The OV-10 is the forward air controller firing Willie Pete from his airplane. And it's a just very complex action-packed scene as they make the actual rescue. Well, in looking at this, it wasn't quite there yet. And the one big problem was that the left wing was covering the fuselage of the airplane, of the Sky Raider. So we decided to bank the airplane, as you see here, and Rick is looking into the scene. We're looking over his shoulder, but now we can see the entire airplane, the ordnance, and it was just a much better view. These are my notes as Rick and I researched this together. Thankfully, he had always had a camera with him, so I had copious amounts of photos of every square inch of the airplane so that I could replicate the weathering, all the detail in the notes that you see on the drawing. But just for instance, add Collins logo to the blade antenna on the dorsal, and the 5 numeral in the TC257 tail number was actually the number 2 stencil turned upside down and backwards. So we'll correct that in the actual painting. Well, we go from the final detail drawing to the airplane. And here's the beginning of our scene. I'm going to show you some close-ups, and then I'll show you the entire composition. We see here the Old English lettering for Rick's name on the canopy rail. He was very proud of that. And the airplane's named Midnight Cowboy, which is kind of a double meaning. They flew night missions, and it was also named after the hit movie at that time with Dustin Hoffman and John Voight. But you can see here the ordnance. Here's a close-up. You see the minigun, the rocket pod, the CBUs, and notice on the auxiliary fuel tank mounted on the center line, that's oil blowback. The oil is dripping from the exhaust ports in the engine, and so it drops down onto the tank, and then you see the prop wash blowing it back as depicted there. Here's a close-up of the tail. There's our Collins logo on the blade antenna, and the numeral 5 turned upside down and backwards as a number 2. Here's our OV-10 firing Willie Pete white phosphorus, as you see. And here's the copter pulling up the first of the 2 crewmen on the penetrator. They'd made a successful pickup, and the red flare you see there at the bottom of the image. I should mention that the white rotor blade, that outer third of the rotor blade is painted white, acted as a stroboscope. If the pilots could blink looking down on the copter, they would see that white spot acting like a strobe, and that's how they were able to spot the helicopter in the smoke or against the terrain with its camouflage. So here's our rescue scene, the moment of pickup after 4 hours of suppressing ground fire, and the painting was titled Sandy 1. Rick received the Silver Star for this rescue, but he said his most valuable memento of that event was the writing on the back of an A6 photo sent to him by the Navy pilot. It said, "Thanks for bringing me back to the land of the living. Thanks for my life." I hope you've enjoyed this new series celebrating aviation art with Mike Machat. We'll be bringing you more paintings in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care.